Back when the PS3 launched, one title drew me in enough to not only buy it, but pre-order an American release ahead of the delayed UK one. That game was Motorstorm from Evolution Studios, a title that celebrated the festival and racing vibes into one package. It not only looked and played great, and still does nearly 12 years later, but it also used the new machine to add far more simulation, physics and chaos, which is something that was new, fresh and felt as next gen as the graphics. A few updates later and they tried to push the envelope further still at the PS4's launch, but graphics took the lead this time alongside dynamic online play and challenges. Even now, the title is not only one of the best on the platform, but it's still one of the most striking and borderline photorealistic at times, bar none. It still kept the same arcade style action and control, but is one of my favourites of this generation for racing treats, and that bike pack was simply the best gift ever, even if the controls weren't quite up to the visuals. Now both games did share one trait, the 30 FPS refresh rate. Motorstorm ran with a dynamic VSync, which allows the top section of the screen to tear if budget is missed by a few milliseconds. It actually tears pretty much all the time in the top few pixels, similar to Wipeout HD on the same console, but I ignore those few pixel lines from my analysis here. The result is a pretty solid title that backed up the new generation shift. Drive Club was fully locked and V-synced no matter what the machine is asked to display, and it runs beautifully. But Evolution Studios was sadly closed a few years ago, but almost all of the team, including director Paul Rushinsky, were taken into Codemasters and given the keys to a new adventure, and this certainly takes a huge influence from Motorstorm, but adds a new twist to that. Welcome to ONRUSH. Now, thanks to a closed beta, I grabbed an early look ahead of the open beta hitting Xbox and PS4 players on Thursday this week. Now, the beta has limited content with a short tutorial you have to follow to get used to the game and how it all works. Then it's onto the full online races that mix AI and other players in a mad, hectic and track-based combat arena, which is key. The big change here from previous games, and all races as we know them pretty much, is you are now not marked in a position. You cannot win a race, so to speak. You simply play within a team and battle it out to score the most points across the rounds, identified by the growing score bar at the top of the screen. You earn points by smashing other vehicles out of the battle. AI are easy and can be done with a single hit. Other players require more effort to boost into them, smash them from side or land on top of them. This creates some truly epic battles, and that lovely physical interaction has returned from Motorsport, which I cover shortly. The tracks are huge but still funnel and loop around like a standard course, at least the ones in this beta do, with ramps, swoops, water, obstacles all adding to the challenge. Earning boost from the stunts and destruction builds your boost gauge. Use this to speed up, and as you fill it you get a trail power that can drop walls behind you, or a trailing power that destroys all that cross its path. I love the scale of the tracks, the frantic action and the sheer amount of vehicles in a race. It always feels full and you have something to aim at and race against, but that word seems out of place and bothers me. Having a racer that does not have any racing is a bit of a letdown, and I'm sure for more than just me. I can see the aims, but the battles, although fun, lose a sense of accomplishment. After they finish, you have won or lost, but unless you dominated, you tend to feel a little like a passenger in that result. My hope is that the full game will include races with rankings that can adjust the playstyle seen here. Now, as an option for more choice, I love it, but as the entire beta is centered around this style of play, I can only go on what I have played so far, and from that, I feel it needs to have more added. As should a sign of your vehicle's damage itself, as you can feel very fragile at times and almost invincible the next. Some kind of visual indicator would be good, beside the screen colour and sound which fades away. Small niggles, but with a title based on attack and destruction, it helps to give you a clue as to just how to play and when to avoid collisions. Now on to the visuals, and they are more than fitting. Certainly the expectation of Drive Club levels should be dropped, as this is more adventurous in construction, physics and sheer numbers thrown around. Weather and time of day is factored into the mix, with tracks being set across different times and even covered in snow. Now this enables geometric displacement of it as you drive or slide through. Water and mud also has a shader effect applied that ripples or leaves trails behind the vehicle. Screen space reflections are used across these puddles, allowing everything within path to be reflected via the depth buffer. Bodywork may use screen space, but it could also be cube mapped based sampling, but it still allows them to bounce light and objects as you hurtle past trees or under bridges. Light beams across tracks with a long shadow cascade and good filtering, and popping is well handled with minimal signs of drawing at such a breakneck pace. All the characters and vehicles are of a cartoon style and cover bikes, buggies and jeeps, and much more in the final game. Colours are bright with a strong colour tone with a logo reminiscent of Wipeout. Tracks are crammed with trees, ramps, huts and much more, and many parts of this employ the game's strong physics engine, which is backed up by the particle system that is in constant use. Texture quality is a bit of a mixed bag with some weaker cobblestones or muddy areas, although you hardly get a chance to view them as you speed past the game at such a hectic pace, so certainly much faster than Motorstorm. I hope that weather can get ramped up with storms, hurricanes and such in the final game, as they would really raise that wow factor for me, and also the fun factor. Weather and that particle system as a whole are mixed with snow whipping past you as you race, sparks flying and bouncing into the screen, debris is hurled across the track and buildings can be smashed through and broken into chunks upon impact. It all feels like an extension of Motorstorm in that regard, with more focus on battle and participants, forcing you to smash your way to victory. At times the sheer amount of stuff being swamped across the screen is impressive, with the typical slow motion sections to enjoy the carnage. It would be nice to have a replay at the end of races or battles to see the best chaos caused, as the takedown only shows your own demise and they cannot be skipped, but a kill cam like end match replay to show off the best moments or glory kill would be great, and it would allow the team to show off its incredible physics engine integration from Havoc all the more. Now, the focus on driving the simulation side and sheer numbers is applauded by me. A great use of the machine, and they have tried to push this even further. See, we are used to Pro and X players now having options to boost frame rates or pixel count. Another pat on the team's back here, likely driven by the online design of the game. Means that both PS4 and Pro players, as will likely X1 and X players, they have the option to make this choice. What the final results are on this are very different at this point though. Taking the resolution mode first on base machine, you are presented with a locked, from my tests anyway, 30 FPS and a 1920 by 1080p image. The action looks sharp and is backed up by a confident temporal AA solution that accumulates information between frames to reduce shimmer and noise. The results are a very clean game in action, but can break down in stills, as the dithered pattern from the shading passes can display noise across parts of the image. But aside photo mode, games are for action, and it works on that score. Now, the Pro pushes this much further, and it hits that sweet spot of 2880 by 1620, which again could be dynamic, but I've only had these counts so far during this beta. Again, 30 FPS is the cap, and it never dropped below that on a 4K screen. This is where the gap between it and the full 2160 can be harder to notice. The same shading issues can crop up, but in action it looks sufficiently clean to convince a 4K image is the final result. But both owners have another option, and that is to sacrifice the pixels for performance, and a new 60 FPS rate is the new target. Halving that 33 millisecond frame time to 16.6 milliseconds means something has to give, and that is pixels. For PS4 players, it means the dynamic scaler kicks in or is turned on, and we now see anything from 1600 by 900 down to 1536 by 864, with a mean count being 1728 by 972. It likely has a 1080p ceiling, but it rarely, if at all, hits that, and in my counts this is what I see. In addition to this, we also now have a V-Sync disengaged, or at least whenever it drops below that 60 FPS ceiling, and that means tearing. Now, to be fair, as this is such a fast-paced title, it can be hard to see, but you do notice it obviously. Now, it does not distract, and it's a cost to bear for that improved controller response and faster screen times. This means we get a decent average, but due to the high level of physical reactions, particle collisions, alpha draw, long draw, and sheer quantity of throughput, it can tear often at certain points during races, with some lows affecting the average, but still well within the 50s or mid-50s to be a worthwhile addition to the game and its option suite. Again, like resolution, the Pro players benefit more from this option. 1080p is now the new ceiling and floor from my tests here, but the new target of 60Hz is delivered at all tested times, bar a very small dip and a small tear at the end of a match, showing that adaptive V-Sync is again in place here to allow it to tear if it does drop a frame or two. But so far so good, and this is a locked 1080-60 racer across the board, no matter how chaotic it gets, and it really does. Now racers always prefer faster frame rates, just like fighters, but 30 can still be fine so long as locked and mixed with some motion blur, see Drive Club. The thing is that shift from 60 to 30 here feels far more stark than normal for two reasons. One, there's no per object or velocity based radial blur to improve the sensation of speed. It leaves your eyes to do the work, and it is obvious. And two, the engine sampling and vector velocity remains at the higher rate, with the rasterization slide cut in half to accommodate the extra fill rate, which is obvious as the motion is updated with bigger gaps between frames, making everything appear with more judder, as it keeps the same velocity or speed impact as the standard 60 FPS title. Now I would love to see if they could integrate some form of motion blur into the 30 FPS mode to help reduce this deficit of temporal resolution. It could even come at the expense of that dynamic scaler, as a small dip down from 1080 alongside a decent sampled motion blur would be a fair trade, but that's just my thoughts. Don't get too up in arms about it. Once you have customized to the drop from 60 though, the improved clarity is welcome, but for such a title I would always take that higher frame rate, and having that motion blur option would make that choice harder to make at least. All that said, I'm very happy the team have included this, and I predicted we would see much more of this going forward, as it makes sense on multiple levels. Choice, something added with the option to reduce the Osd opacity from opaque to transparent, i.e. the on-screen display, for all players, and allowing future machines to automatically scale with the hardware boost on frame rate and resolution, without a Windows machine even being booted up. As it stands, the Pro offers a sublime version of the game that uses the hardware well for both player types from visual clarity and performance. It is of course the best of both, and it is my recommended version of the two. Hardly a shock though, the most powerful machine runs it best, who'd have thought, huh? But the PS4 version certainly handles the 1080-30 mode with no issues at all. And they could have left it at that, but I must sing their praises again, as they have not taken the easy option and worked to give base players the same choice as Pro. The performance mode is certainly welcome, and many will appreciate that it's been added, myself included. There may be a chance here to improve the performance slightly more towards that 60 FPS mode, or adding that motion blur option to the 30 mode, and I think that will have resolved my biggest gripe from a visual presentation level. The push for physics, destruction and numbers is for the better. Improving the track details with more things to look at but taking away from the enjoyment would have been a waste in my opinion. No, the biggest shame is the lack of any real racing, and thus satisfaction of progression or even participation is my only concern at this point. But with another month to go and likely a much newer version sitting within the Codemasters repository, this early taste is a teaser of more to come. And what that is, I will find out in the full review next month. Check back at the weekend for my look at how the Xbox versions stack up, but for now, I have to rush. I'll catch you on the next one.